Hello students. Students, on 24th of this month you are going to appear in the PCS pre-exams, and this video is particularly for that exam, and the topic is phases of nationalism. So without giving any background, we just come to the point because time is very much short to you people, because on the 24th you have to appear in the exam. So let us start the topic. The topic is phases of nationalism. It's very much important topic for the prelims point of view, and many questions the student get every year from this nationalism or the phases of the nationalism. So here we have to discuss three phases of nationalism. The first phase of nationalism is from 1885 to 1905. That is also called the moderate phase. And second phase is the 1905 to 1918. That is the extremist phase. From where these extremists emerged? From the moderates phase itself. Because the British policies, the moderates couldn't get anything substantial, that gave rise to extremism. And third phase is from 1919 to 1947, that is the Gandhian era. These three phases we have to discuss in the nationalism or the national movement of India. Where we have to start, that is from the first phase of the 1885. This 1885 is very important year in modern Indian history, because it was in this 1885 that the Indian National Congress was established by A.O. Hume, who was a retired civil servant whose name was A.O. Hume, Alan Octavian Hume, and the Viceroy of India during that particular time was Lord Dufferin. This 1885 Indian National Congress was established. Just take an example. If there is a building, a large, huge building of 60th floor, and the 60th floor is completed in 1 month time only, it doesn't mean the entire building is constructed in 1 month. It has taken several years, and its foundation is under the land, 5 feet, 10 feet up to. Similarly here also, if that is a building of 1885, the Congress, its foundation was somewhere else, and that was in the pre-Congress association. There were different pre-Congress association in India, but the difference was that those associations were at the regional level only, not at the national level. So these regional association, either it was the Bang Prakashika Sabha, or the Landholder Society, or the British Indian Association, British Indian Society, Indian Association, Indian Society, London Society, or the Pune Sarvajanik Sabha, or the Madras Association, or the Bombay Association, or the different associations of these that took place in the area of the Deccan, that took place in the area of the Bombay, that took place in the area of the Madras. So there were different regional organizations which were already there in India before the rise of the 1885. But all these organizations were of the regional level and the local levels, and ultimately all these regional organizations culminated or emerged in the Indian National Congress of 1885. Then we have to discuss why this Indian National Congress was established, why the Indian National Congress was formed. Here we have to discuss in brief two theories are there. One theory is the safety valve theory, and other is the theory that is given by the critics of this Indian National Congress. That is a critical theory behind this Indian National Congress, and one is the safety valve theory. So students, here we are seeing a word, safety. It means Congress was formed, that was formed by the British people. Alan Octavian Hume was the founder, and the Indian members who were associated in the formation of this Indian National Congress were Indian members were there. That was just like the Dadabhai Naoroji was there, Grand Old Man of India. ये क्वेश्चन आ सकता है प्रीलिम्स में. Then Dadabhai Naoroji, Badruddin Tayyab-ji, Surendranath Banerjee, Firoz Shah Mehta, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, S.N. Banerjee, different Indian peoples were there in the formation of the Indian National Congress. But why this Congress was founded? That there is a safety valve theory given. And what was this safety valve theory, and why the British were forced to give the name safety here? Before understanding the background and what was behind this Congress, we have to understand this safety valve theory was somewhere related with 1857 revolt also. How we can correlate the theory of safety valve that was responsible for the formation of the Indian National Congress to the 1857. During the 1857, the revolt took place in our country, all knows, and there were different causes for that, and the revolt was suppressed unluckily also. because of the different causes, but that is a separate question. We are not discussing the 1857 here, but this 1857 was related to the formation of the Indian National Congress somewhere. How? Because there was the dissatisfaction in all the fields in India. Either it was the social field, political field, economical field, religious field, or military field. The people in all the fields are completely fed up because of the British policies, the exploitative policy of the British people, and they wanted to take revenge. But they were not united in different fields, and it was Mangal Pandey ultimately later who took the first initiative. What I want to focus here is that in the social, political, economical, religious, military causes, the Indians were completely fed up, and ultimately that their fed upness ultimately resulted in the revolt of the 1857. And before the revolt of the 1857, the British were never concerned, never worried about the unity of the Hindus and the Muslims. They are living unitedly, that doesn't matter to them, because their sole aim was to make money from our India country. They came as the traders. So money was in their mind when they came to India. They came as traders and ultimately became the master of the country by sowing the seeds of disunity, or they followed the policy of divide and rule, and divided the country that was already divided into different number of castes, different number of classes, different number of religion, and there was no unity. Transport and communication was not there. India was not a country of the Renaissance country, the Renaissance that took place in Italy in the 14th to 17th century. So they people become the people of with rationalistic thinking, analytical approach, and scientific attitude, and that was the reason a small country, UK, their whole geographical area is not more than the Bihar area of our country. Very small country it is. They were able to rule such a vast country of India from 3000 to 3200 kilometer for 200 years. Why? Because that was the difference between the social structure of the Indian social structure and the British social structure. Their social structure, I told you people, was based on the scientific thinking, rationalistic approach, and analytical attitude, and that was completely absent in our society during that particular time. It was, the Indian society was full of the social evils and abuses, like the child marriage, female infanticide, polygamy, parda pratha, sati pratha. These problems were there in our Indian society, and that forced us to think somewhere, and that was the reason that we were not able to think scientifically. But that was we can say that up to an extent, that the Indian peoples were forced to follow these traditions. That was another cause, that was another issue, and separate video I will upload for that also. Why the child marriage was there? Because the Muslim rulers, they started abducting the Indian girls and the women, and their humiliation policy forced the Indian parents to get their daughters married at early age, so that they could get the security, safety from two families. So that was the cause behind the early marriages. Then child marriage, female infanticide also emerged from that. Ultimately, sati pratha was also some there. So Indian people were forced to follow this, and they had been following this for the centuries. And British people started what? They started interfering in that, and that became the social cause. Then politically, the Indians were not in the legislative councils, and they were the active role, politically active role was not for the Indians. Economically, they were exploited. They used to take the raw material from our country and flooded Indian markets with their machine-made manufactured goods, which forced the Indian people, because all the Indian peoples were not patriot. They used to buy those products because those products were very much good also in quality, and in rate wise also they were very much cheap as compared to the Indian products. So that why the Indian handicraft industry completely collapsed, and the British were responsible for that. In the religious causes also, they used to openly disgrace our Indian gods and goddesses. In military cause, lots of military causes were there. In the military cause, we can say that the Indians farmers were sent to the front row, and their salaries, bhattas, emoluments were very much less as compared to the British officials. Then these are the different causes which forced the Indian people to go for a revolt, and ultimately they revolted also. The British people were not concerned much about the Indians, particularly the Hindus and the Muslim unity before the 1857. But when they saw the 1857 and in the revolt they saw the unity of the Hindus and Muslims, both fought against the British people. So now here, that was the problem, that that became a cause of concern from the British for the British people, and they started thinking seriously how to divide these two major communities of India. And that's why they started sowing the seeds of partition of our country, of the partition that ultimately takes place in the 1904 when Bengal was partitioned. In 1905 during the time period of the Lord Curzon, and that was a thriller. Ultimately, the country was divided in 1947. So that's beginning was somewhere in the revolt of the 1857. They wanted to they wanted to separate Hindus and Muslims, and that's why they started infusing in the mind of the British people. The British people started infusing in the mind of the Muslims that no doubt tomorrow if we leave the country India, then these Muslims would be ruled by the Hindus because they are in the majority. That type of points were started coming to the mind of the Muslims people, and Muslims started getting the support of the people like Sayyid Ahmad Khan, who was influenced by the British people. That ultimately responsible for the division between the Hindus and the Muslims, and that's why after 1857, British were seriously started thinking about how to separate these two communities, and ultimately and after this, when they successfully divided these two communities, this relates to the theory of the formation of the Indian National Congress. How? Because it was in the mind of the British people. In 1857, the Indians revolted, and in the near future also they could revolt against the British people. And they wanted to avoid that revolt because they came in the country to make lucrative, profitable trade from India. They wanted to make money from India. They didn't want to face any revolt in the country. That's why they divided both Hindus and the Muslims. The Muslims were separated. Now, how to pacify these rest of the Hindus? That was another problem for the British people. That's why they started thinking uh, how to make a distance from these Hindus also, and otherwise these Hindus could again go for the revolt, and they did not want the revolt, they didn't want the repetition of the revolt, but it was very much clear to the British people in the mind of the Hindus, there are the revolutionary feelings. No doubt they crushed the 1857, but the revolutionary feelings in the mind was still alive in the mind of the Hindus and the Indian people. That's why they formed the Congress, and they said that they formed this Congress in order to provide a platform to the Indian people. And on that platform, the Indian people would give their problems to the British government, and the British government would provide a solution to them. And the platform was what? This platform was of the Congress. And in this Congress also there were the Indian members who were just Indian in skin only, in color, that which the British used to call Kala and Gora. They were Indians in skin, otherwise their mind was full of that they were inclined toward the British people, and the people like Dadabhai Naoroji, Badruddin Tayyabji, Surendranath Banerjee, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, they keep India in the hands of those British people rather to those Indians who were full of social evils and abuses. That's why they started giving their support to the British people. And British people wanted the support, they required the support of the Indian people in order to rule the Indians, in order to rule the masses. So what they did, the British people, in the Act of 1861 also what they did, they started giving entry to the Indian people. They started giving entry to the Indian people in the legislative councils, so that rest of the people would see what now the Indians are in the legislative council, so they would do no harm to the Indians. But to whose Indian the British gave the entry? Those Indians, those who had helped the British in suppressing the revolt of 1857. So in order to give them award or reward, they started giving them entry in the legislative councils. So they were Indians, definitely there were, but they were those Indians who were inclined toward the British people. Same is the case here in the Indian National Congress also. The Indians were there, but those Indians who were inclined toward the British people, and who imagined that India would remain safe in the hand of the British people, not in the illiterate and traditional Indian people. That's why they supported them. And British used the Indians against the Indians. They gave this safety valve theory. So what is the safety wall theory? Just safety wall theory emerged from the concept of that when we cook our food in the pressure cooker, so water boil at 100 degree, and if there is no outlet in the pressure cooker, then it will explode. That was again in the mind of the British people. If something substantial could not even to the Indian people, then their mind would explode again, and once again the 1857 could repeat it. And they did not want the repetition of 1857, so there was a double problem in front of the double challenge in front of the British people, and which they handled very tactfully, very diplomatically. They killed two birds with single stone. They killed two birds with single stone. How? They came here as traders and they wanted profitable trade. Before 1857, they carried on the profitable trade. But after 1857, there could be another revolt, and they did not want the revolt because this revolt and draining of money from India could not go side by side. That's why they wanted to separate it. And that's why the Congress was formed. Just take the example. What the critics says that this what the British said that they had formed the Congress in order to give a relief to the Indian people, and that's why on this particular point, people like Lala Lajpat Rai and some economists, R.C. the economists, they supported this safety wall theory because on the one side. On the one side of the coin, the British people were saying that this Congress was formed for the betterment of the Indian people. The Indian people will be able to place their problems on this platform of the Indian National Congress, and we will provide the solution to them. But the dark side of the coin was something different, and that was the real side. That the moderates could not understand that particular time from 1885 to 1905. That's why there was the rise of extremists in 1905. But it took long 20 years from 1885 to 1905 when the Indians couldn't get anything substantial from the British people. Then there was the rise of extremism. And from 1857 till 1905 there was no revolt in the country of that level, of the 1857 level, and British people killed two stones. That's why I'm saying that they killed two stones with a bird. Drain of wealth was definitely there. And drain of wealth was up to that extent that in R.C. Dutt, the great economist of our country, who would say that in the early years of the 20th century, on yearly basis, 30 to 40 crores rupees drained from India to UK in different forms. Either it was in the form of the salaries or in the form of the pensions or in other forms, the draining of money was there. And that draining of money continued after 1857 without any revolt. That's the important issue. The Indians didn't revolt, and on the other hand, on the one hand, Indians didn't revolt, and on the other hand, the draining of money was continued there. And what that the British wanted, and they got it also. Indians didn't revolt. Why they didn't revolt? That is the black side. That is the dark side of the Indian National Congress. But that's why the critic says that, and that dark side was disclosed by the personal letters or personal papers of Lord Dufferin. The first session of the Indian National Congress took place in the Gokul Das Tejpal Sanskrit College on 28th of December 1885. And in that 72 delegates, Indian delegates took part. That happened in 1885, 28th of December. But in the month of May, in 1885, what is disclosed from the letters of Lord Dufferin, he says to the governor of Bombay, his subordinate, he said that maintain some distance from the delegates. On the one hand, you are saying that from these delegates, the British would solve the problems of the Indians, and on the other hand, you are saying that maintain a safe distance from this. So that was the double game of the British policies, and that's why the critics are giving a very good example of that. They says that just take the example of a ceiling fan. A ceiling fan example they give. They says that the British gave in the form of Congress, they gave just like a ceiling fan whose blades were disturbed. As all we know that the manufacturing company of the ceiling fans, they inclined the blades at a particular angle, and that's why the cool air of the fan reached every corner of the room. That's how they scientifically designed these blades of the fan. Similarly, here also the British also scientifically, diplomatically, they designed the Indian National Congress and its structure and its structure. How they designed this? Just like that, the Congress was working. The Indians were not revolting. Neither they revolt nor they got anything from the Congress also. Same was just like the case of a fan whose blades are disturbed. They are disturbed and they are not inclined that particular angle, and that's why the people are seeing that the fan is rotating, but they are not getting air. What's this? The fan is rotating at a proper speed. The fan is rotating, but the people who are sitting under that, they are not getting any cool air. And people of India took 20 years in understanding the logic behind that Congress. And that was the reason there was the rise of extremism in India from 1905 onwards. And that was the beginning of the second phase. So what was this fan theory? The fan theory was the fan that was moving but not giving any cool air. That was the Congress. They were working, but Indians were not getting anything. Till how the Indians could keep the patience, and ultimately they started the extremist movement. And what the moderates demanding? Who were the Congress, who were from 1885 to 1905, and their demands were very much liberal demands. Very much liberal demands. What demands they had? They demanded more number of Indians in the councils. In the legislative councils by the Act of 1861 and by the Act of 1892, they increased the number of the Indians in the legislative councils, but they didn't have any power. They were just like a lion without teeth and claws. Second demand was separation of executive and judicial, which was also not met. Then hold civil service exam in India simultaneously with UK, that was also not met. Then appointment of Indians in the commissioned rank in the army. In the army, the British people used to send the Indian soldiers to the front row. But what type of salary, emoluments, perks they were getting in comparison with the British? Zero. Besides this, they were forced to go to the front row also, and what the highest post in military they could get during those particular time, that was a Subedar only, non-commissioned officer. And in the civil services, they were not getting the post above the mean. That's why the Indians were completely dissatisfied, and they demanded that appointment of Indians in the commissioned rank in army. Then they demanded repeal of the Arms Act. The Indians couldn't carry the arms, while the British could carry the arms. Then support to the Indians indigenous industries. Support to the indigenous industries. As I told you that was one of the important economic cause of the revolt of 1857 was that the Indian handicraft industry was completely collapsed because of the British policy. They used to take we know that they used to take the raw material from India and flooded the Indian markets with the manufactured goods. And people used to purchase those goods also, because all people are not patriot. They are just their whole life is limited to their families. To their families only, so they used to purchase those goods also. That's why Gandhi came with the process of charkha and khadi in the 1920s in the non-cooperation movement, that we will see later. Then the next demand was that freedom of speech and press, that was also not there. That was during the time period of Lord Lytton, all these steps were taken. After that, Ripon also, up to an extent, Ripon introduced some reforms, but during the time period of Lord Lytton, all these happened. The freedom of speech and press was not there, then Arms Act was there. So Indians demanded what? The moderates demanded freedom of speech and press and relaxation in tax. So that type of liberal demands the moderates were asking from the British people, and the British people didn't give them these demands also. One thing. And on the other hand, there was the continuous draining of Indian economy. Thirdly, the Indians were not resisting. So we can see how clever, what cunningness was in the mind of the British people. The revolt didn't take place after 1857. There was a continuous draining of Indian economy, Indian money from India to UK, and what the British wanted. That's why I used the phrase they killed not only two birds, rather several birds with one stone. So these were the points that were responsible for this. Then we have to discuss British did not want to repeat the revolt of 1857. That's why they followed the policy of divide and rule between Hindus and Muslims. उन्होंने उनको divide भी कर दिया. And people like Sayyid Ahmad Khan, they helped the British people in divide and rule of the Hindus and the Muslims. Then safety wall theory also we have discussed, and drain of wealth, and Indians didn't resist. And then in the Act of 1861 and 1892, there was the inclusion of the Indian members definitely, but not up to that mark. And those Indians they involved, they were just the skin, in the skin color they were Indian, but in the mind they were completely inclined toward the British people. So that's why the rest of the common people, the masses, couldn't get anything substantial, and that was the cause that the moderates started losing their faith in the British people, and there was the rise of another phase, second phase of the Indian nationalism, and that was the rise of the 1905 to 1918, that is the extremist phase, and there was the fall of the moderate phase from 1985 to 1905. Okay, now we have to discuss what were the causes which were responsible for giving the extremist phase in our country, or why there was the rise of extremism in India. First of all, the first cause is that there was no change in administrative policy. There was no change in the administrative policies. No doubt, they started giving entry to the Indians in the legislative councils by the Act of 1861 or 1892 or later 1909. But in the 1909, they created the policy of separation between the Hindus and Muslims and separate electorates for the Muslims by the Act of 1909. That is the memento mori reform. It was the reform in names only, but in reality, no reform was there. Then economic impoverishment of the people that we have discussed. R. used to say that 30 to 40 crores of rupees per year was draining from India in the 20th century, in the beginning of the 20th century period. Then there was the social religious reform movement. This also important, very important point, which ultimately responsible for the rise of the social religious reform movement in our country. As I told you, students, Indian society in the 19th century, 20th century, that was full of the social evils and abuses were there in our Indian society. What the evils, just like the child marriage, female infanticide, polygamy, parda, sati, etc., all these problems were there in Indian society, and social reformers emerged during this particular time. Like Raja Ram Mohan Roy came, reforms in the sati pratha. Then Dayanand Saraswati emerged, Swami Vivekananda emerged. Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who laid the foundation of Arya Samaj in 1875 at Bombay again. In 1875, he laid the foundation of Arya Samaj, and in 1885, Indian National Congress was founded. What Dayanand Saraswati used to say that he infused the feelings of nationalism in the people of our country. He used to say that why we are today suffering from these social evils and abuses, why we are illiterate today, when once we used to teach the entire world. Go to the age of the Guptas, that was the golden age of our country. People used to come our country for higher education. The Cambridge and Oxford were in our country, the Tashila University, Nalanda University. People used to come for higher education in our country, and during that particular time, the people were illiterate in our country, India. When that type of speech people started getting from these social reformers, either it was the Raja Ram Mohan Roy or Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar or Dayanand Saraswati or Swami Vivekananda who founded this RK mission, he established. Then Annie Besant also came with his Theosophical Society. People become very much aware of their Indian culture, and they started looking toward the social reformers and started following them in the later stages. And ultimately, that was the rise of nationalism, responsible for nationalism in our country. Then there was the famine. India faced a severe famine in 1896 and 97, and a plague in 1899 and 1901. Plague was there and famine was also there, and the arrangements which were given by the British people to the Indians, that was completely, we can say that there was no use. That is why the Indians were highly dissatisfied. The British soldiers, on the plea of searching the plagues patients, they used to enter in the houses and misbehaved the women and the old age person, and that's why the Chaprekar brothers in Maharashtra, they killed the plague commissioner Mr. Rand. Mr. Rand was killed by Chaprekar brothers because of the plagues. Then there was the policy of the Curzon. Curzon policy is particularly Calcutta Corporation Act in 1899 that reduced the Indian control on the local body. So because of the Calcutta Corporation Act, that was the policy of the Lord Curzon, then Sedition Act, which reduced the Indian freedom, then the University Act of 1904 that reduced the autonomy of the universities. So these policies of Lord Curzon also responsible for the rise of extremism in our country. And after that, the important cause was the partition of Bengal. Curzon partitioned the Bengal, and this was in continuation with the British policy of divide and rule. What we have seen after 1857, they started sowing the seeds of disunity among the Hindus and the Muslims, and they become successful in that also. And from 1857 to 1905, a ground was prepared, and in 1905, Curzon partitioned the Bengal. And what plea? A very childish plea they gave. What the plea they gave? They are not able to run the administration of the Bengal because it's a vast state or vast area it has. And what was the real cause behind that? The real cause behind that was they wanted to separate Hindus from the Muslims, because in the East Bengal Muslims were dominated and in the West Bengal Hindus were dominated, and they wanted to separate both these communities, and that's why they separated the Bengal. And what the plea they gave? They says that they are not able to run the administration of Bengal, and on the other hand they were running the administration of the entire country. So they were just trying to cheat the Indian people, and because of these different policies there was the rise of the extremism in our country, and that was the first phase. In the first phase, we have discussed what were the different pre-Congress associations were there, which ultimately culminated into the Indian National Congress. Why the Indian National Congress was formed? Because of the safety valve theory. That theory that was given by the British people, but actually something behind the curtain, and behind the curtain was that the people understood it, but in the later stages that was responsible for the rise of the extremist phase. How, and after that I told you people how this 1857 related to the safety valve theory, and this safety valve theory was the dual game of the British people. And this dual game policy British already played in the period of the Lord Clive also. Lord Clive gave the policy of dual government. Lord Clive started in Bengal, the dual government is started, and with that dual government all the powers were in the hand of the British people without any responsibility. And all the responsibility were in the hands of the Nawab of Bengal without any rights and without any power. The powers were in the hand of the British and no responsibility, and responsibility in the hand of the Indians without no power. That was their dual game, and history repeated itself. Again they repeated the same game in the formation of the Indian National Congress also. What they said that why the Congress was formed in order to give a platform to the Indian people, and on that the Indian would place their problems and the British would provide them a solution. But no solution was there. What the solution we got? We have seen here nothing. There was no solution to the Indian problems. So that was the dual government policy of the Clive, which ultimately reflect in the 1857 revolt of the safety valve of the Congress of this Congress theory. And